Soon, Dorothy finds herself in her old farmhouse, the one which she crashed in a previous visit to Oz. It sits in an overgrown forest. No cheery, dancing munchkins to be found here, only wild vines and twisted trees. Dorothy wipes the dust that has etched its way over the windows, trying to see inside. Then, she finds the yellow brick road, only to realise that it has been uprooted. Its bricks broken and shattered. The land she wanted to get back to is twisted, nightmarish and hostile. The old farmhouse. I grew up in an old farmhouse in the rural areas of Cornwall. We had farms around the landscape, and I could climb up one of the small, gently sloping hills and look out into the horizon and see only fields of wheat for as far as it went. That was my Kansas. I think it was late summer when I found the old farmhouse. I'd gone out to explore, despite my father's instruction to stay in our house's garden. I'd hiked my way over the old crumbling stone wall that bordered our garden, and made my way into the fields, venturing as far as I could before the sun would set. I avoided the fields with the cows, great towering things, and the clouds above gradually began to grow dark and pendulous. I'd gone further than I had before, keen to examine a small copse of trees in the distance that I'd never been to before. It was there, down near the foot of the hill, that I'd seen the old farmhouse for the first time. I'd hurried down to the house and ran up to the windows. They were etched with dirt. I could barely see anything through them. I stood up on my tiptoes trying to look into them, and could only make out a brownish haze. I scrubbed the windows, and as soon as I was able to make out the inside of the house, it was in disarray. Chairs tipped over, and tables lying broken in the corner. I could make out a doorway leading into another room, but whatever lay through there was out of sight. It wasn't the same house. The layout was different and the rooms inside it were different, but in and of itself, the house was almost a perfect fit. It was like my very own version of Dorothy's ruined farmhouse, transported here not far from my home. I wanted to get inside. I don't know why, perhaps simply because it was there, or perhaps because I wanted to get further than Dorothy ever did in the film. I pried the window open and, under the house the witch lies dead, crawled inside. It felt warm, as if the air itself was hot. There was a soft hum in the air, which I soon realised was coming from a few buzzing insects. It felt stuffy, as if the summer heat was magnified and made heavy. There were no lights, or if there were, the lights would not come on. The house was dyed a soft reddish brown from the dust on the windows. I crept across the house stands atop the dead witch as she rots beneath wooden floorboards, and sure enough they creaked beneath me. I looked into the doorway to the other room and found it led into a kitchen. Several items lay in the sink, cutlery and sharp edges. I started to feel sick. I didn't want to be here. The air tasted wrong. There was a smell, something I'd never smelt before, but I knew it was bad. I turned to leave and wanted to run, but I heard a heavy sound at the doorway and knew it was a footstep. The figure stood in the doorway. A man. The house is marked with death. It sours it from below. The witch was left, her body broken. Stood blocking out the sunlight. He wore a thick, heavy brown coat, the kind most farmers in the area would wear, but his beard was thick and malted like wire wool. His hair hung in dense clumps and stared at me with his eyes, sharp and brutal eyes with utterly intense hatred. He towered above me, a small child of about 6 years, this giant of a figure. He was holding something in his right hand. I couldn't see what, only that it was sharp and pointed and stained with mud. Had to be mud. The man opened his mouth and roared at me, his teeth crooked behind his mane-like beard, releasing every echo of the old broken house with his words, "Get out." I ran. I turned and ran out of the house, charging through the kitchen and pulling myself through the window and out into the field. I didn't slow down for a second. I tripped and fell into the mud at the base of the window, but I didn't stop. I kept running. I didn't look back. I ran over the field and through the trees. I was gasping for air and my legs hurt, but I didn't stop running. Not until I got home. I didn't notice it was dark, and that the sun had set, and that the dark of the night had covered the village. I slammed the door shut, blocking out the man and broken farmhouse forever. My father came downstairs when he heard me slam the door and demanded to know where I had been and what I had been doing. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to tell him, so I lied. He demanded to know more ardently, telling me that it was late and that he knew I was lying. When I eventually did tell him, he marched me up to my bedroom and ordered me to lower my trousers and lay over my bed, where he removed his belt and thrashed me until I was screaming, crying rampantly. He made me promise, on threat of the same punishment being delivered again, that I would not sneak into people's houses again. I was still sore for most of the next day and had no idea until years later as to why he had grown so angry with me. When I did find out, it was in my teenage years. Our family had moved away from the village into a small house in a large city. The change had been considerable, not just in terms of the building, but out of the new lifestyle. It became impossible to avoid hearing about the world around us, and I no longer had my parents' continual presence to shelter me from the information that you could find on newspapers or the internet. It was on the evening news that I had seen the photograph of the man in the old farmhouse. The reporter explained that he had died in prison, serving his life sentence for the murder of 4 children, all aged between 4 and 9 years old. He had been arrested a month after my dad had taken his belt to me and made me promise not to venture into strangers' houses again. In prison, he had committed suicide. The news didn't say how. I later learned that he had broken off a sharp edge of his toothbrush and swallowed it, slicing open his throat. He choked to death on his own blood. Dorothy continued her journey down the broken ruins of the yellow brick road, and so did I.